Hey, what's going on, everyone? Happy holidays to all of you who are celebrating a holiday during these times, and Happy New Year to all of you who are celebrating New Year's, I guess. So today we got a pretty fun video. We're opening up some Christmas presents that had to do with the car, which is pretty awesome. And we're gonna be installing some stuff, so let's get started. I'll bring a box over. All right, so we'll get started with our first package here, which is from 034 Motorsports. So we'll flip this open. And inside we have what looks like an empty box when you first look into it. But it is the 034 Motorsports rear sway bar for the B5 S4. So you see here we have the sway bar, and we'll put that off to the side. And then in here we also have the bushings and brackets included, and these look amazing. They're billet brackets, so you won't have issues with corrosion, and we also get some brand new hardware, which is always nice to have. So I'll show that to you guys. Really nice product from 034. Okay, so we'll quickly go over some specs. Just looking at the bar itself here, it is 25.4 millimeters thick compared to the about 16 millimeters that the stock bar is, if I remember correctly, which is a huge increase in both overall diameter and also weight. So the bar is definitely a lot heavier. Really don't think you'll notice any difference in weight in the car, but just keep that in mind. Another thing to notice is the two holes you'll see here on each side for mounting the sway bar. So the sway bar is adjustable. The stiffer of the two settings gets you about 330% increased rate over the stock bar, and I think we start around 210 with the softer of the two settings in this case. With the hardware included, we'll start here with the bushing, which is a graphite impregnated bushing. This should last much longer than most other bushings out there. It's also pretty stiff, and that is also joined in by the new bracket you'll get. It's a billet bracket, so it's made out of a solid piece of aluminum, super light. It's going to be super durable, and just overall really nice construction from 034 Motorsports. Really nice piece here. And the last thing we get here is the new hardware. So very nice hardware, just overall new hardware to install the brackets onto the subframe. Now moving on to the rest of our unboxing, now we have the accessories to install our new rear sway bar. So when you get the bar, it's nice that they include, of course, the bar, new hardware, and also the bushings and the brackets to hold the sway bar. But there's also a few other things we need to get in order to make this work correctly and have a safe install. So the first thing we need is here, also from 034, but in this case you'd get this from whoever you got your sway bar from. New Speed and Hotchkiss also offer these, and that's the rear subframe support brackets. So looking at this, similar to the brackets that we're going to use to hold up the sway bar, this is a billet piece, so it's made out of a single piece of aluminum. Really nice construction from 034 Motorsports. It's a very premium feeling piece. Again, aluminum, so you won't have issues with corrosion, and overall just great construction. So you'll need two of these. They come in a kit, so you don't have to buy them separately, but need one for the left and the right side. And what these do is reinforce the mounting point for the sway bars. Our cars were meant to hold our stock sway bar, which is puny, like we mentioned earlier. So the mounting point where the sway bar is held is really weak. In this case, we have the support brackets that are there to reinforce that area so we don't have any issues with the subframe like cracking or bending, which can lead to some safety issues. So if at any point you're upgrading your rear sway bar, make sure that you go ahead and reinforce your subframe in one way or another. A lot of people do go in and just weld more material on there, new plates, rebar, or whatever they use to reinforce the rear subframe. But in this case, 034 and a few other companies offer a simple solution for you to get it done that bolts right in, and that's what we're going to go with. Now we're still not there yet, but we're almost done. So next up is just some random hardware we have in here. But this random hardware actually belongs to something really important. So this hardware is for our new rear sway bar Endlinks. So when you're getting these Endlinks, you'll have a few options. So in this case, I went with Myle HD Endlinks. The stock Endlinks you should not keep or go with if you're upgrading your rear bar. They're plastic. They've probably been on there forever. They're probably brittle by now and have fatigued, and they're overall just crap, and I'm sorry to say that. So these are metal. They're the Myle HD, so they're heavy duty quality in this case, as Myle claims. And the biggest part, like I mentioned a few times already, is that they're metal and not the plastic that the OEM ones are made out of. Now, you also do have the option of going with the 034 Motorsports adjustable rear end links, and those will definitely be better. So there's no doubt that those will be better end links. They are also many, many more times the price of these, and if you have it, go for it. I definitely recommend them. You'll have a better experience with those end links overall. You know, you'll just have better response from your sway bar. But this is a great middle ground between keeping stock and going with 034. And in complete honesty, this will be closer to 034 than the stock will ever be. So definitely recommend these if you are looking for an OEM style solution to the rear sway bar and not looking to go with an adjustable rear end link. But definitely upgrade your end links no matter what. As soon as you upgrade your rear sway bar, you'll probably have issues with the stock plastic end links if you keep them. So we got two of those, other end link there, and of course, like I mentioned already, the new hardware for our end links, which is very important. This hardware that we're going to deal with is probably really rusty, old, and new hardware never hurts. And that's all we got for you. So let's get the car up in the air and get the install started. Okay, so we got the car safely lifted here. When you do lift the car from the front, I'm pretty sure you all know this, but I'm gonna reiterate it just in case. Make sure you chock your fronts because you don't have an e-brake up front. So your car could just roll forwards while you're jacking it up. So make sure you have a good chock up there. I mean, I recommend everybody just go buy some nice rubber chocks, but if you don't, get a thick piece of wood, a cinder block, whatever it be, but put it in front of your tire so it doesn't roll forwards on you, and hopefully not while you're under the car. All right, so we'll move on from there. Okay, so we're under the car now, and I'm gonna give you a quick lay of the land, just so you have an idea of what we're looking at and where we're gonna get started. So we are looking at the driver's side of the car from the rear, looking forwards. And the first thing we're gonna look at is our stock sway bar bracket here, as well as our bushing. So you could see these are just a bit worn out, a little past their time, if I may say so. So glad of replacing that and the sway bar overall. Now here you could also see and get an idea of how thin the rear sway bar is, and also how thin the mounting spot for the sway bar is. So you see this bit of sheet metal here, it's what's holding most of that rebound pressure from the sway bar. And now you get an understanding of why it is that we need to replace that. Well, not replace it, but reinforce it with that 034 bracket. You could also see how thin the rear sway bar is. So if I put my finger there, you could see it's honestly just about the width of my finger. So it's pretty tiny compared to what we got going on from the 034 bar. It's also really rusty, and just overall glad of replacing it. Now moving further on to the left, here is the bottom mounting spot for our sway bar end link. So you can see this is the plastic end link I was telling you about before that we're going to be replacing, as well as new hardware that we have. You can see that hardware looks a bit deteriorated and just worn and corroded overall. So glad of replacing that. Now looking over at the right side, so the passenger side, we're seeing pretty much the same thing. So old bracket, old bushing, old end link right here, as well as the thin old bar, which we're gonna be replacing. So the first thing we're gonna do here before anything else is actually, I already did it, but recommend you do it, is to spray these down with penetrating fluid, just so that way you get a bit of a head start and an advantage, because if these have never been touched before, they're definitely going to be hard to remove. So just do yourself a favor and get under here a few days before you start and spray some penetrating fluid on these. After that, we're going to start with taking our tires off. Now we're looking at the top bolt for the rear end link. So we're going to go here, remove this. This is a 17 millimeter. These will be on pretty tight. I'm going to use the impact to remove most of these. You're probably going to need a breaker bar or some other tool to give you more leverage to remove these, because these, being that they haven't been removed in a long time, might be seized. So 17 millimeter there, so we're gonna go ahead and remove that. Okay, so that bolts out. Now we can move on to the other side. Remember, everything we do on one side, we will reciprocate on the other, just to keep things even and we don't lose track of where we are in the process. So now that this is removed, you'll see that this travels pretty easily out of there, and you'll have this top bolt, which we have new hardware for. So we'll move on to the other side and do the same thing. I won't show you that because it's the same exact process as this side. Okay, so next up we're working with the 13 millimeter hardware that's holding the sway bar bracket onto the subframe. So we could skip this here because this will all come out in one piece now that we removed the top bolt from this upright. So you can see here this moves freely. We'll just bring that all down as one piece. So here, go ahead and put a wrench on one side, wrench on the other, and we'll loosen this up. So because of the tank here, it's going to be pretty difficult to get any power tools in here to release this, so this is going to be a bit of a hassle to remove. Okay, so there's one, and now we'll move on to the top. So same process, just a harder spot to get to, because why not, right? Okay, so that's one side out. We'll move on and do the same thing to the other side. Okay, so that's all of them there. And now we can go ahead and remove the sway bar. Okay, so now that we got all the hardware off, the sway bar is pretty loose, so we can go ahead and just finagle it out of here. And it's out. Okay, so here we're gonna take a look at what we're replacing. So we have the 034 bar on top and the OEM sway bar on the bottom. Not that that needed, any clearing up. I'm pretty sure it's pretty obvious to you guys. And we're also just gonna take a quick comparison and look at the new bushing and bracket, so you could see how much more robust the new bracket is and how much bigger the new bushing is. So a lot more support there. And then we're also going to take a look at the stock end links here. So you see the plastic end link there next to the new Myle HD Endlinks. So big difference overall in appearance. It may look like the Myle bar just looks a little more flimsy, but that's not true. Remember that this bar is completely plastic while this one is metal. So you have steel versus plastic there. And just overall better construction on the Myle HD Endlink. So we added the Endlinks there on both sides. And one thing to keep in mind when you're installing these, just make sure you follow the same path as the OEM. So you see there's a small bump here, leads to the flat side. So follow the same thing here when you're installing the new Endlink. So again, just make sure you have each Endlink on the right side of the sway bar. And now we're going to move on to installing our brackets onto the rear, so that way we don't have any issues with bending or cracking on our subframe. So let's get back under the car, install these, and then move on to installing the bar. Okay, so now we're looking at the passenger side of the car from under, looking at it, from the side of the car. And we're going to be installing the 034 Motorsports subframe reinforcement bracket. So for this bracket, we have all new hardware, as you can see here. So what we're going to do here, just to show you the layout, we're going to take the right bracket and we're going to place it right here. So you see we have these two holes on our subframe. We're going to use those two holes for mounting. Also, I live in New Jersey, so you could see this subframe is just crazy rusted. We'll be replacing this later in the year, but for right now, we're just gonna go through with the insulation. So bolt up top, bolt on the bottom, and that's gonna be in there like that. You also see that there's a bit of adjustment built into the bracket itself. So what you see here, that side to side adjustment. So what that means is we will thread these bolts in and get the hardware all placed, but we won't tighten this all the way until we have everything in. That way we can adjust the hardware and get everything lined up exactly where it needs to be and not have to go and play that loosening and tightening game. So we're gonna feed this hardware through and get this side of the bracket mounted on. Okay, so real quick, just going to show you the bracket again. This is kind of upside down compared to what we're looking at here, so I'll flip it over. So we have how the bracket came. So we had this U part here, which is what we're going to be installing next. And that had this little bar here. So we remove the hardware on either side of that. That lets us slide this little bar out. And we removed this hardware earlier to remove this part of the bracket from the U. So now once we have the U isolated, which we have right here, this U is actually going to go ahead and loop over and around this. So we're going to slide that in now. So now we have it here, and we can go ahead and take our hardware, which we removed from it earlier, and start threading that in. We'll put in the top as well. And just to explain to you, the reason why we have so much adjustability, so you see that up and down adjustability here and this side to side adjustability that's built into this part, is because these things shift over time, especially if you've already upgraded your sway bar. So because this is so thin, it tends to bend and twist, and 034 is just accommodating that by giving us this extra space to work with. So we have this adjustment and also the adjustment front and back, which allows us to line this up perfectly. Now that we have this piece in, the last piece we have to install is this little bar here. Now when you remove this, you notice that you had two different lengths of hardware. The longer piece of hardware is actually going to come here through the subframe and into the bar. So we'll slide this little bar in and thread this in. And then the other bolt is going to go on this side and thread in here. And that's what will hold this bar in place. Now you probably noticed that this bolt here is kind of in the way. So this is where our bracket would be that's holding our bushing and our sway bar. So what happens is this actually gets removed and our bolt for the bracket gets fed through here and into this bar. And that's what creates the reinforcement for the subframe. So instead of just having this little piece of metal here that's holding the sway bar, which I can move on my own, you have this larger bracket that's creating this angle and connecting us to the larger, thicker pieces of the subframe, which allows us to run that bigger bar. So not only do we have this piece of metal holding the bar, we have this larger square from the subframe holding the bar together. Well, not the bar together, but holding the subframe itself together. Now, one last thing to note before we tighten this all up is this top bolt here. So this top bolt now is going straight through the subframe and again into this bracket, just like the bottom bolt is. And that's actually being held on by this threaded hole you see here. So this is the opposite side bracket, but the hole will be in the same spot. So this threaded hole there is now your nut, which will be holding this bolt in place. So instead of having nuts back here, which will hold the bracket in place, the bolts are going directly into this reinforcement bracket, which further ties things together. So now that we have this side set up, so now we'll just move on to the other side and do the same exact thing. So we'll head over, install this bracket, leave these loose, and then move on to installing the brackets and bar. All right, and now we're done with the driver's side of the subframe support bracket. So now we'll get the bar in here, lay the bar in, and install the bushing and the bracket. Okay, so now we have the sway bar in. First thing we got to do is slip our bushings on, but before we do that, we actually have to grease these up. And with the sway bar from 034, you actually get a tube of grease, which I'm trying to pick up right now and I can't. Oh, there we go. So we're just gonna put some of that grease in there. You see the tube of grease here. And then just spread that inside. Grease it up well, and then we'll just slide the bushing right. And then we'll slide the bushing right over. All right, so there's one, and we'll do the same thing to the bushing on the other side. Okay, so my mic decided to give out here. Battery died. So I'm gonna do a quick voiceover just so you guys know what's going on here. So we took that longer piece of hardware, that log bolt we spoke about earlier, and we're gonna feed that through the sway bar mount, through the subframe, and into that subframe reinforcement bracket there, as my bird screams in the background. From then on, we're actually going to move over to the other side. Leave this loose so you can see how it moves side to side there. So that way we still have some play with the sway bar. And we're just going to feed that same bottom piece of hardware on the driver's side now and get that threaded in. Again, not tight, loose enough so where we could slide the bar side to side. And we have some adjustment when we're trying to put the end links on. Okay, so here now we're looking at the sway bar. So we have that bottom bolt in. So the sway bar is being supported now by the subframe. And as you can see here, I'm demonstrating how loose it is. But what we're going to look at here now are the two mounting holes because we're going to put the end link on. So the bolt further from the body, which is the one I pointed at first, is the least responsive. So that's going to offer you the softer sway bar response because it has more leverage. The one closer to the body has less leverage and it'll do the opposite. So that's going to be the stiffest that the sway bar will be. In this case, I am going to run it at the stiffest setting. So we're going to put the end link through there and just thread the bolt on lightly on the other side. So here we're looking at the passenger side as we were looking into the car from the wheel well. And what we're working with here is our top bolt for the sway bar mount. So we're going to feed our new hardware in. Remember, we got new hardware earlier for the sway bar. So we're just going to feed the hardware in, thread that bolt in lightly, and just move on to the other side and do the same exact thing on the other side as well. Okay, so just a quick note. We're looking at the passenger side here. The passenger side is a little bit tougher to do because of where this tank is. So the tank gets in the way of the hardware, which makes it hard to get it in there and also makes it hard to just tighten it and get everything in. So we're going to grab our two pieces of hardware here, and we're actually going to take the shorter of the two bolts and then just slide it into the top here. And we had to loosen this all up in order to get this bolt in, so that way we could slide this up while the bolt is already in the bracket, because if not, it'd be impossible to get in because of where this tank is up here. So here we are up top, just to get you a better idea of where we are with the bolt. I don't know if I got the right angle from below, but you can see the bolt in here. Pretty hard to get to because of where this tank is. So we're actually going to use a screwdriver to push that in, get it through the hole, and then start threading it in. So we're going to have to use an open-ended wrench to get in there and tighten that one, so that's going to take a bit. Okay, so we were finally able to get this top bolt in. It was a real pain in the ass. I actually had to make a special tool for it. So you see this little crappy wrench I had before. I shaved it down with a grinder, and that's what I used to get it to tighten this. Once you get it in most of the way, you could actually get the box end of a wrench in there, and you can move about an 1/8 turn at a time, and that's how we did the remainder of it. But definitely a real pain. So be prepared to spend a half hour trying to get this bolt threaded, and then another 20 minutes getting it in all the way. Really a pain, but hey, at the end it'll definitely be worth it. So now we'll tighten up the two brackets here on the driver's side. And on the top. So now we have everything tightened here when it comes to the bushings. So the sway bar is where it's supposed to be, which is a good thing. And we also have every other bolt threaded in. So everything lined up correctly. So now we'll go back, starting with the bigger bolts on the brackets, and tighten those coming from one side to the other. And we'll just reciprocate whatever we do on the passenger side over on the driver's side. So let's head over there and do that. So first off, we have the two larger bolts here holding the bracket to the subframe. So we'll go ahead and tighten these all the way now. So we'll get a wrench in here to hold it down and then start tightening. And now we'll move on to the top bolt. Now we'll move on to the two 13mm bolts holding the U part of the bracket to the main part here. From then on, the two bolts going from the bracket through the subframe and into the sway bar bracket are all set, so we don't have to touch those. Now we'll move up top here to the bolt holding the end link. So now this is held down by a 15mm nut on the back and that 17mm bolt. Tighten that up. Now we work on the bottom of the end link connecting to the sway bar. Like we said earlier, we're going into the stiffer setting, so we're going into the hole that's closest to the body. That'll give it less leverage, which will make the bar stiffer. So we're going to tighten this one. That's a 16mm. And now we're just going to replicate exactly what we did here on the other side. Okay, so we're all set with the install here. Starting from the passenger side here, you see we have our end link connected. Then going here, you see our subframe reinforcement bracket, and then the bushing bracket right there also connected. Moving along, nice 034 logo. And then on this side, we see the same things. We have our bushing bracket connected to our subframe reinforcement bracket on this side too. And then we have our end link going all the way up top there. So we are all set. After you're done with this, make sure you go through, check all your bolts, make sure everything is tight. Really don't want any of this coming loose. Also, please pay attention to the fact that this end link and the one on the driver's side are both on the same setting for stiffness. So don't make sure you don't cross those just in case. Okay, so we're back from our test drive, and holy shit, it's crazy, I never thought that a sway bar would make this kind of a difference. I mean, I've read the reviews, everybody says it's great, it increases the stiffness, the body roll, all that stuff. Also, sorry to interrupt, but make sure you like and subscribe. But man, does it make a difference. I mean, the rear end just feels locked down. I think a lot of that actually has to do with the bracket that supports the subframe, so I think that makes a huge difference to begin with. Going with metal end links will also make a big difference, but by far the biggest difference was made by the sway bar. I mean, it's crazy. The rear end is locked down. It feels like it wants to come around on the corner. I mean, the car's still all-wheel drive and it is front heavy, so it still understeers a bit, especially when you're coming out of a corner. So basically the balance is coming in kind of oversteers a bit. The car feels like it's going to turn around, and then mid-corner it switches back to understeer. So not bad handling characteristics. I mean, I wish you could just, keep the same balance throughout the whole corner, but again, we do have an engine in front of our axle, so not much you can do about that. But overall, definitely recommend this mod to anyone who likes to drive their car a little hard. I mean, if you drive on the streets, it's probably not going to be a super noticeable thing, but you will see the differences. It's hands down noticeable. There's no subtlety about it. You put it on, the rear end of the car feels different, even in low speed corners. Like you don't have to take them hard, you just feel the difference right away. So 100% worth it. It's not cheap by any means. I mean, the brackets, the support brackets, the end links, and then buying the sway bar comes out to a little north of $500, I think. So which is a lot, and not everybody has super deep pockets, but hey, if you're able to do it and you can do it, I definitely recommend it. There are other brands of sway bars out there. New Speed, H&R, I think used to make it, they'll discontinue now. Hotchkiss still makes kits. I'm pretty sure all of them will feel different. I think this is the stiffest bar sold right now. It's also the thickest. So I don't know, man. I think go for it if you can. It's definitely worth it. And holy shit, does it make a difference. See you guys in the next one. Peace.